Hello, in this tutorial we'll be hand painting a metal crate. This is part of a series that I'm doing on hand painted materials. It's all part of a much bigger course on gabbit.co.uk where you can go right through from beginner to advanced levels, and all the courses are free. You can also get along to my Discord server, chat to like-minded people and myself, and join in the challenges and competitions there. All the links are in the description. This tutorial is meant for people with a basic understanding of Blender, and it's more about painting techniques rather than the program itself. So you should be able to follow along with any program capable of painting on 3D. So you can see my object here is slightly more complex than what I've done before. I'll just explain how I created it, but I won't go through the creation process because it's a fairly basic object. To start with, I beveled the main cube. You can see the bevel here. Then I applied the bevel. So I did it with a bevel modifier. Then I cut the top and beveled that and dug in that line just so it's got some sort of lid. I took all these faces and inset them and then extrude them in, and I did something slightly more complicated on the top and built these sort of inset pieces here. I did this all with a mirror and then applied the mirror, which reminds me I can delete this middle line just by dissolving the edges. You can see there's triangles around the place, but that's okay. It's not animated, it's low poly and hand painted, so that should be fine. So we're ready for painting. I've already created my material, which is metal color. I just need to add it to my node editor. So Shift A, texture, image texture. I can hook that up and I'll open up my metal color. This is now ready for painting. I have already unwrapped it as well. If I select all, you can see my unwrap there. That's just with a smart UV project. All these things I've done in previous episodes, and I'll put the links in the description to quick guides to those steps. And again, this is mainly about techniques rather than the program itself. I'll quickly show you my reference images. So I've got realistic metal and rust and hand painted by other people. Someone did ask for me to put the reference images on the screen, but I'm just going to put them on at the start. I'm not going to keep them up because it's a bit awkward in Blender to do that, and I don't find it's really beneficial. So let's go into paint mode, texture paint mode. I've already got my brushes set up with a dark and a light brush. What I will do to make it slightly easier is click on the dark brush, and I'm going to rename this one dark brush. That way it will appear at the start. And the light brush, I will rename that with a 2 at the beginning, and the texture draw brush, I'll rename that with a 3 at the start. That way they'll all be at the beginning here, and that should make it easier for me. The dark brush has a multiply, the light brush has a screen mode. And remember that the light brush needs to be lighter than grey, and the dark brush darker than mid-grey. So I'll go onto my texture draw brush again. I have a palette from the last one available, and some of them I may use. Sometimes it's quite nice just to be able to click on one of these palettes rather than finding a colour. And a lot of the time with these things, especially to start with, I put in random colours just to colorise it and add variation. So the starting point, as always, is to find a texture mask. I've already got one set up, which is a cloud texture here. You can change those by coming over to the texture panel here, making sure that your brush texture is selected, and then you can change the size of that. I'm going to change it to a bit bigger so it's a bit sort of softer. These are sort of much harsher when they're smaller like this. So sort of fairly soft brush like that. Remember, this is your brush head. The texture is where you use things like stencils. This is your brush head. So I'll change my brush size so it's nice and big. Grab a colour and just start painting on with some variation. Oh, and I'll turn symmetry on in the X and Y. I can't turn it on in the Z in this case because I've got a lid. And I'm just going to keep changing the colours slightly. You do have to watch out with symmetry that you don't get too much symmetry like this. At this early stage, that's okay. Watch out for tiny little glitches like this as well. I can smear those in a bit later on, but for now I'm just adding a bit of colour variation with a variety of colours to get those metallic look. There's going to be a lot of rust as well, so a few reddy colours in there is great. So it's quite subtle. Watch out for these sort of things. You do get little glitches like that. Occasionally when your brush reaches across one edge, it sometimes sort of spreads across. So you just have to watch out for that a bit. Try and keep flat or right on the corners where you can. Okay, so there's a good amount of variation there. There will be some areas like this where you've painted from the top there and it hasn't hit those areas, that's fine for now, because we will be going over most of this. Like I say, we've just got it there for a bit of variation. Every now and again, add a new colour to your palette if you feel it's beneficial. Okay, so now I'm going to go in and just add a bit of shading so we can start seeing these areas a bit more. I'm going to keep on my texture draw brush, but I'm going to take the mask off for now. And I'm going to use the line tool in this case, so the stroke, and go to the line, just there, and bring my brush right down, and just highlight the crevices and edges with either dark or light brush strokes. I'm going to go to this sort of slightly blue colour, generally towards mid-grey, and just above for the light. And let's just find those edges. You may find this easier to quickly nip back to object mode and go to flat shading. It gives it a tiny bit more visibility. The other thing you can do is N and go off shadeless. That will certainly help you. So let's grab that corner there with line, stroke enabled, and it creates a light line for us. I'll put the strength up just a touch. And there we go. With the mirror enabled, that means it will work on the other side as well. Okay, so that's highlighted those edges, and then I just need to do it on this side as well so it mirrors across here. That's the great thing when you have symmetrical objects, which often is the case. It does increase your workflow. Using symmetry is very beneficial. Okay, so I'll darken the brush now and come into these crevices. So you can see I've just highlighted those edges and made that stick in a bit more. And that helps us to be able to see those. Now at the top. Every now and again I will center my brush with Alt F. Your mirror brush of course will only work if you do have your center point right in the middle. I've made that mistake in the past where it's slightly off and then I've had to adapt all my drawing and not use the mirror tool, and it takes it just a lot longer. Okay, so it's all fairly rough at the moment. Just go down the edges here and across the top there. Watch out for that sort of stretching. Yes, I'm not doing very well there. It's stretching across the top too far. So I need to zoom in and get a better angle. Just darken that and get in those crevices there as well. Make my brush a bit smaller. So I'm just doing the very basic shape at the moment. You can, when it gets a bit awkward in tight places like this, go to orthographic mode with 5 on your numpad and dead on front view, and you should find it easier to draw those lines in these cases. And shift spacebar, or I think control spacebar is it in 2.8, to get full screen mode. Okay, so let's put the shading back to shadeless and see how we're getting on. See, now we can see all our edges and we've got a good starting point to start building our model from. And it doesn't look too bad already, really. It's a little bit light. If I'm looking at my reference images, they have much darker metal. So the colours that I'm going to use more now are going to be darker colours. I'm not going to put any rivets on or any details yet. Start with the base colours and then build up from there. Build the details slowly. Don't start detailing one area. It's very rare that artists can do that. Most will go from blocking out colours to a second level of detail, then a third level of detail, and then minute details after that. Let's just quickly get the smear brush. I'm still not really sure where those glitches come from, but they often appear, especially when you're filling in large areas. Usually the smear brush gets rid of them. Let's just get the texture draw brush now, and with a dark grey, start filling in more shadow, because it's fairly light at the moment, so I can go towards darkness. Still got the line brush on, so watch out for that. Make sure you go back to space and undo what I've just done. Be a good idea to have my texture mask back as well. I've still got the mirror turned on, and that's worth thinking about, but it's also worth leaving on whilst we're still filling in the larger parts. I'm actually going to go back to shading. So I think I need a bit, yeah, my lines were off. I need to be far more in here. Remember to keep mixing up your colours, adding variation. There is a fair bit of colour variation within metal, it seems, and rust definitely, and I want lots of rustiness in here. It wants to be old and battered. Careful not to make your brush too small. I was probably doing it a bit too small at that point. I will need it small, of course, to go right into these corners, but for the general shading I don't need it that small. Right in very corner crevices there's a lot of absent light, so not much light, so they'll be a lot darker. I will put it back to the line for the middle part. Now you can see this bit is far too symmetrical at the moment, so I will have to go over this without symmetry on. But when I'm going over this, I can have symmetry off this way, but it's good to have it on so it repeats on the back here, that's fine. So I will keep switching between the symmetry modes. But that's a bit later on. Just getting that sort of rough looking shape first. I'm going to change the outliner to the 3D view. Generally 50mm is quite a good lens for your camera. 35 is a touch wide. Anywhere between 50 and 100 is fine. Let's start getting a bit of that rust colour in now. Bit of yellow. Be a bit careful with this though. Want lots of rust on the bottom. There is kind of a grain to the rust as well, because water damage usually causes rust and therefore it's dripping down the box. So you have to think about the direction of that grain sometimes. I'll sort out the bottom a little later. Okay, it's a decent base colour. Going to keep going, but I might go into a bit more detail now. I'll bring down the size of my noise a touch as well. As I go in a bit further, then the brush detail will need to be closer. I'm trying to keep that mirror on as long as I can, as long as I can get away with it. So there, I just turn the mirror off so it won't appear on this side now. So I'm adding variation into my shape now. Once you've got some really interesting colours, then the multiply and the screen brush will be very effective. Now at this point, when I turn around to this side, now I need to change the mirror again. We can start adding a bit of detail now in terms of the rust. I'm not putting any rivets on yet, I'm waiting for those. Okay, so I'm going to go across to my dark brush now and start filling in. Let's just check what I've got. I've got mid-grey, so that's not going to be effective yet. Turn my strength up a bit, get my texture on as well. Make sure that's on random and double check the symmetry. Every now and again I'm pressing D for display so I can see where the symmetry line is. So it's in the Y, so that's great, I can work on this, and then I have to be in the X when it's that side. It does make quite a difference where the bottom of your shape is. I'm adding a lot of ambient occlusion in a sense to the bottom here, and hopefully this would be this way up. If they decide to move this in the game and turn it on its side, it won't work as well, so you do have to consider that. If your model is for game and it's supposed to be in any direction, you can't really add the same ambient occlusion that I'm adding now. You might even decide to do two separate boxes, one that's on its side and one that's upright. You could have them sharing the same maps as well, in case you wanted to bring the file sizes down and things. So in the terms of the unwrap, you'd unwrap this box, move it all to the side of the UV unwrap the other box, move it to the other side, and only paint on those sides, and they share the same map. Now I've made a mistake there because I've gone to the side and I haven't changed my angle of mirror, and that's why it's looking very symmetrical here. I might even get the smear brush in and sort that out a bit. So in the Y across there, it means it's going to mirror from this side to this side, whereas I've got it in the X, so it is still doing it on the other side. A bit more tricky when you're doing the top. Really, if you want complete variation here, you need to turn mirror off altogether. Notice I'm not adding any highlights at the moment. That's all for the very last stage. So it's a very grimy sort of metal at the moment. I'd like to go a bit further with the rust, so I'm going to add some light spots to it where it's gone really sort of yellowy. Somewhere my light brush, it's quite low strength. I think 2 would be best, about 2, yeah. Still got my texture on it as well. That's the only thing, when you go from brush to brush, make sure you have got the texture on and the strength is set to how you like it. It does change from brush to brush. Going to go to my dark, but not too dark this time, but I'm going to give it a lot of orange. Maybe even my texture draw now, with a bit more orange. I think this needs to be a bit darker in this section, so I'm going to turn my symmetry on again here. Come in, add a bit more darkness up the top here. That's good. I think I can start adding a bit more detail. I'm going to see what it looks like. Shadeless. It's getting there. Probably need a bit more darkness in the corners. I can do that with the line brush on the dark. So bring it right down, get the line up in terms of the stroke. I'll bring the shading back so I can see the lines for definite, but I know that they do need to be darker in there. And I've got symmetry in the Y, making sure that it's going across from one side to the other. I have still got my cloud brush on, so there's a bit of variation in it still. And that's often where you get problems, when you're a bit close in and you're in corners, you get a bit of strange bleed like that. Just watch out for that. I'd like to know what other people think about that actually, whether they find that same problem and how they get around it. If there's any experienced people sort of watching this and they've figured out a way around that problem. So I always find that's a major issue, is these sort of glitchy bits. You can see one just there as well. They seem to be unavoidable when I do it anyway. And sometimes here I'm too close in and it's not painting on it, so I have to come out just a touch, and there we go, now it'll start painting. I don't understand that either, why there's sort of a clipping. But I don't think I'm that close in. Maybe I'll just turn this down and see if that affects it. No, it's not. It still can't paint. Okay, so there's a strong crevice in there. Let's make sure it's in here as well. Still on the line, so it's overlapping itself. Just making sure there's a nice deep groove in here. Okay, let's add some highlights as well with the light brush. Just watching out for the colour. Sometimes it's good to give metal a bit of a blue tinge. Keeping my symmetry on, it's quite a low strength, just going across fairly randomly, so as if the metal's a bit bent in places. Every now and again I'm turning the shading back on so I can see exactly where I need to draw. This side the grooves look fairly good and it looks like it's got lots of depth. This side not so much, so I need to add a bit more in here. Let's go to my dark brush again. I think that's a bit better. I could probably go for a very, very dark thin line now. Give it some real detail. Still a very light metal, maybe a little too light. If I think that, I can of course go to my fill brush, turn it to multiply, and then just with a tiny bit of strength fill the whole thing. There we go, just darkens it straight away. And I go one more, and there we go. That does mean I can increase my highlights a bit more in places, so it gives me a bit more room there. If I sample one of these general areas around here, we're just slightly under mid-grey there, but it's certainly getting there. So just feeling a bit of detail in now, sort of flaking metal, so there's a sort of edge here, and there's really sort of a hugely rusty bit underneath. Maybe add a bit of reds in there as well, as if the metal's flaking off here. You probably noticed I'm not really concentrating on the bottom. Like I say, this is not really meant as an asset that can be turned over. For this sort of style you'd have to do another asset that's on its side if you wanted to use that. Okay, it's starting to look a bit too real actually, rather than cartoony, which is the style I was more going for when I was looking at my reference images. So I'll just be a bit careful of that. That's what I have a tendency to do, is just look and study images, and I'm mainly looking on the reference images at the real rust and metal at the moment, but I probably need to look at more of the cartoony stuff and get that style across a bit more. It's probably about time to start adding in a bit of detail as well in terms of the rivets. So I'll go to orthographic mode for that, that'll be easiest I think. And I will mirror it both ways. I'll just be a bit careful about how I'm drawing them. So let's just start off with texture draw, make it fairly dark. I'll actually change my curve this time. So it's a wide curve. I'll get rid of this dot by pressing the cross there, and it's got a sharp fall off. So when I paint now, if I put the strength up anyway, I'll turn my brush texture off. Maybe that's affecting it. There we go. That's the brush texture affecting it too much. I'll go this way first because that's where the mirror is, and I just want to see how far I can go. To about there, I think. I'll turn my brush pressure off for radius, that will help as well, and actually for strength, so I can just tap and it will create the right size. Should have done that for the early ones, I'll do those again. So the brush pressure is just over here, So I'll get the brush the exact size I want it. That's not too bad, and of course I have to come around to the side here as well. It's looking okay, they look very flat of course at the moment. Now we just darken them and highlight them. They're actually pretty dark at the moment, so I'm just going to add highlights. I think that should work. Change my curve, and my curve's okay for this one because it's the light brush, but I'll have to remember to change it for the other one. It's too much of a highlight. I might go just with the texture draw brush actually, so I don't go beyond a certain point. The screen will just keep adding. So I'll just get lighter and lighter. Put my default curve back, which is just down there. Oh, and my brush pressure. Put those back on. And my brush colour. Getting it all wrong there. Okay, that's the start. They look just pasted on at the moment, but we'll change all that shortly. Going to add tiny bits of variation on them. That's good. Now we need to incorporate them, so we need to get a bit of this rust dripping down from them. So we use a lot of rust colours now. Not too dark yet. Just variations again. Coming from them. A bit careful of the mirror here. Might turn it off for those middle ones. Same thing with a bit of a darker brush. Just adding that colour variation. Right, let's go back to the multiply and then really push that in. Okay, so I think we're in a good place for the sides at the moment. It'd be nice to work on the top a touch. I think we'll have a couple of rivets just in the corners and maybe some indentation and rivets in here as well. Be nice to experiment and try some different techniques there. So let's go to orthographic and top view, and with my texture draw brush to a reasonably dark colour, no texture mask, change the curve so it comes up here a bit more and get rid of that point with the cross. Just need to take our pressure sensitivity off and see what this looks like. Just got to judge the size. It looks okay. So now I'm just basically working on the top. Got mirror turned on for the rivets. They can all look pretty similar. They're far enough away not to be too affected. And in the middle I'm adding some bolts. So again it's a case of highlighting with the screen brush, darkening with the multiply brush. Nothing particularly new. Remember to keep adding variation to your colours. And now some minor details, maybe some scratches and dents. Watch out for symmetry at this point. So a dent, you can kind of do two triangles on top of each other. One is light and one is dark. Okay, so we're going to have one more thing to add. We're going to have some printed text that's sort of rubbed off and become rusty. So what I've got here in Photoshop is just some text. I could put some symbols in here, but hopefully you'll get the idea from what I'm doing. I've got a transparent background, 2 layers, text, transparent background or an invisible background. I'm going to save this as a PNG and use this as a stencil. So file, save as. It has to be a PNG and then it will keep the transparency. You can do this on programs like GIMP as well. So in Blender, I'm actually going to use my texture this time. In fact, let's go to the texture brush first. Use my texture, create a new, come across to my texture tab. Ooh. And just make sure we are actually on the brush texture. There we go, image or movie. I'll open up my PNG stencil, which is spelled wrong. So there it is. If I want to change it to stencil mode, I come down to here where it says tiled, change that to stencil, and there is my stencil. I'll just quickly make sure that symmetry is turned off for this. I can move this with my right mouse button. If you want to know more, then click on the card in the corner or the links in the description below. And this is using stencils. So I'll come to the front view and orthographic, zoom in a bit, and it's going to go in here. I can change the color of my brush and that will affect what it comes out like. I make my brush big, and then when I paint over it, you can see it creates a stencil. Put my strength up a fair bit here and give it a bit more brightness. Yep, a bit less in fact. What I want as well is a texture mask in there, and then it will affect my brush as well, and it'll come out cloudy. That's what I want a bit more really. So I'll do this, I'll bring the brush intensity down, I don't want it too strong. You can control it more by the way you're brushing. Excellent, and just to smarten that up, I'll close that down, come in with my texture drawer brush and just add a few variations to it. Bring the brush right down. I could actually go to darken this time, make it quite a low strength, and just highlight the edges as if they've sort of been stenciled on and there's a bit of depth to them. The resolution of your stencil is important, as you can see there. Mine wasn't so great, so I should have sharpened that up a bit. But that's fine. Zoom quite a long way in, so it shouldn't matter. So I'm giving it a tiny bit of an edge, so there's almost a bevel. Just with a bit of darkness, and that should help make it look more realistic as a stencil. It's a good idea as well, after you've done that, to go over it slightly with, again, a light brush, just so it sort of blends in to the background a bit. So I'm just pulling it in so it's the same color as the background. The rust is affecting that text. So well done if you've made it this far through the tutorial. It's quite a long one this time. I'm testing out a few longer tutorials. People do ask for them occasionally, so I thought I'd give it a try. I did try this tutorial out in Blender 2.8, but it was still a bit glitchy, so I thought I'd go back to 2.79 for now. So there we have it, that's pretty much it. Do let me know whether you like this sort of tutorial and whether you'd like to see more, and do comment with anything in particular that you'd like to see. I can't promise that I'll do it, but I'll give it a good go. So thanks for watching.